Have you been wanting to learn 3D modeling with Blender, but you didn't know where to start, and every time you opened the software it just looked overwhelming? Well, you've come to the right spot. I'm going to help you learn the Blender basics. We're back, and you see that I have a new file open up in Blender. Also, we are greeted with this splash screen. You have different types of files you can open up: a general 2D animation, sculpting, FX, or video editing. To the right, you also notice that I have recent files that I've been working on. And if you also look in the right top hand corner of this, you'll see that I'm using version 3.1. If you're using earlier versions, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going over the basics and they will operate just the same. Now, to get out of this splash screen, just click anywhere in the 3D viewport. Once you do, you'll see the default cube, and you'll notice that it is highlighted with a gold lining on mine. Yours may be different, or a yellow lining. If you click anywhere else in the 3D viewport, it will get rid of that lining. If you select the cube, you will see that it gives the goldish yellow lining around the cube again. This lets you know that you have that object selected. Now, if you notice here on the left hand side, you have plenty of tools. If you hover over top of it and you get the two arrows and pull it out, it'll tell you what it is: the select box, the cursor, the move, rotate, scale, transform. The only thing that I'm really going to get into is the move, the rotate, scale, and loop cuts. I'm going to get into the loop cut tool. I'm not going to use it by selecting these, but if you do, I'll show you what it looks like. You have the move, and it lets you know that you can grab this on the Z-axis and move the object on the Z-axis, move the object on the Y-axis, and the X-axis. Now, these axes are colored, and if you notice up here in the right hand corner, they are the same thing. Z is blue, X is red, Y. If I grab the Y and pull it around, rotate, I can rotate in the viewport, the camera, my view of the object. I can rotate it around. I can also do this by clicking in on the middle mouse button or the scroll wheel. Make sure that you have a mouse with the scroll wheel, and I can do the same thing. So therefore, I do not use this a whole lot. Actually, I never use it. But you are mostly going to click in on the scroll wheel or middle mouse button and rotate around the object. Now, if you hit the shift key on your keyboard and then click in on the middle mouse button, you can pan to left to right or up and down. So you can really get a good view of anything on the object. Now, I use hotkeys. Hotkeys is probably what most Blender users use. It's easy to remember, they're pretty simple, and it gets easier to remember the more you use them. So if you want to grab the object, just think the letter G. So you hit G to grab it, and you can move that object. You got to make sure that that object is selected. If the object is not selected and I hit grab, Blender does not know what I'm telling it to grab. So I have to select it, make sure it's highlighted, then I can hit G for grab, and I can move it around in the 3D viewport or 3D space. Rotate around. Now, say I want to constrict the movement to either the Y-axis or the X-axis or the Z-axis. All I have to do is hit G and then hit Z, and it will tell Blender that I'm only wanting to grab it and move it on the Z-axis. If I want to change that, all I have to do is hit Y or X while I still have a hold of the object, and it lets Blender know only move it across these axes. Constrict the movement to these axes. Now, if I right click, it'll move it back to where it originally was. Now, if I hit GZ to tell Blender that I want to grab it on the Z axis and move it up, and then I left click, that lets it know that's where I want to put it. But if I hit GZ and then right click, it lets Blender know to let it go but put it back where it was. Now, if I want to undo that movement, and I don't want to leave it right there in the middle of the viewport floating, I hit Control Z and it will undo the last movement. Now, if you want to use the rotate tool, it's simple. R for rotate. Hit the rotate and you can start rotating it around by moving your mouse. Same thing with the grab. If you want to constrict it to the Z axis, just hit Z and it'll let Blender know, hey, rotate this object, but only on the Z axis. I can hit Y, rotate it, but only on the Y axis. If I hit X, you guessed it, hey Blender, only rotate it on the X axis. It's pretty simple actually. Now if we want to scale it, yeah, you're right, it's the S key. Hit S to scale, and there we go. Say I only want to scale it on the Y axis. Same thing, scale only on the Y axis. Hit S X and it'll scale it only on the X axis. If I hit Z, it'll scale it only on the Z axis. Blender is pretty easy to learn. It just takes time. It can be overwhelming, but a lot of it is just repetition and doing it over and over and over and over. And the more you do it, you get that muscle memory of those hotkeys, and your workflow will get faster and faster and faster. That's why I'm not going to waste a lot of time with going over all these extra tools or any of this. I just want to right now go over the basic tools that you're going to use. You're going to use the rotate, the grab, the scale, and you're also going to be able to tell Blender which axis you want to move it on. Now, as you can tell right now, we're in object mode. If you look up here in the top left hand corner where my cursor is, it lets you know that we are in object mode. You can't really do a whole lot to this cube, but if you hit tab, you go into what is called edit mode. And if you notice, you have these little dots right here, here, and here. These are called vertices. And then these right here are called edges, these lines. And this filled in section here is called your face. Now, as you can tell here, I can select the vertices, but I cannot select the edges. But if I want to, up at the top of your keyboard, you can hit 2 and it'll only select edges. And if you hit the number 3, you can select only the faces. I'm going to go back to vertex mode, and you'll notice that I can grab one vertex at a time. I'm going to rotate around. Now, same thing, if I hit the G, and I can move that vertex around and really transform this object. But say I want to grab 2 of these vertices at one time, you'll see that it'll be a problem. I can't just click on the second one because it unhighlights the original one. So I have to hit the shift key while the one that I originally clicked back here is still highlighted. Hit shift and then select the other vertex. Once you do that, you'll realize that Blender lets you select both of them. Now I can hit G and Z, telling Blender I want to grab it and move it across the Z axis, and that's exactly what it lets me do. I can move it across the Z axis. Now say I want to hit G for grab and then hit Y to let Blender know, hey, grab these 2 vertices and move it only across the Y axis. I can do this. I can also grab these 2 vertices and move them across the X axis. Now, we can rotate the vertices with the rotate key, R. We can rotate it around specific axes. Most of the time it's easier to do it with the edges than it is the vertices, so we're going to go into edge mode by hitting the 2 right there on the top of the keyboard. We're going to do that by hitting the 2 on top of the keyboard there. And once you do that, hit R to rotate and then hit Z to let it Blender know, hey, only rotate this around the Z axis. And it starts to rotate it. Now, I want to hit Control Z to undo a couple of these. Kind of get back to where we started. Alright. Once we're here. Now, we're at a good spot for me to show you the loop cut tool. Now, I use this tool quite a bit in a lot of my models. And what you want to do to get the loop cut tool to work is you want to hover your mouse over the object and hit Control and then the R key. And once you move it around after hitting that, you'll notice this line appears. Now I can rotate it here or here, but once I click, it will put that loop cut there. Once I do that, if I only click the one time, you'll notice that I can move this to any part of the object that I want. So now if I click, we have a loop cut all the way around, and we've added more vertices and faces to this object than what originally was. Now say I want to do another loop cut, but I don't want to add a bunch of loop cuts by doing this over and over and over. Say I want to add a bunch of them, but I only want to do it with one go. So once we've hit Control R and we see these lines to show where the loop cut is going to go, I can scroll up on the wheel, scroll wheel here, and you'll notice that it's letting me add more and more loop cuts, and you can keep going and going and going. Now say we want to do 2. Now I can move those 2 up and down the object wherever I need them to be. Well, I think that's going to be it for this video. I wanted to just cover the basics. The best way to get practice is start out with that default cube and just start grabbing it and rotating it and scaling it. Then go into edit mode, grab a vertice and move it to wherever you want to go, and then grab a face and rotate it, or grab one specific face and scale it, or grab 2 faces and scale them at the same time. Really play around with it. That's the easiest way to learn, is get in here and play with it. Most people I've seen, I've tried to show or teach, friends or something like that, they're always like, man, I'm afraid I'm going to break something. They feel like it's fragile. But I'm going to tell you, it's hard to mess Blender up. If anything, it's going to crash, and all you're going to have to do is restart the application. Besides that, Blender is pretty easy for the most part. It is a learning curve, but it's not hard. It's just time consuming. Don't give up on learning it, and put time into wanting to learn it. It's like anything. If you really want to learn a skill, you've got to put the time. You can't give up. If you don't put the time, you're not going to learn. So after this video, leave it open and just really play with it. Just grab it and move it around in different places. Really see what you can do. Get used to moving around the viewport to see different sides of things. Play with those simple functions and you can really go somewhere. You can start making simple models. Now in the next video, I'm going to do a low poly tree, and that's really going to go more and more in depth on these simple tools that I showed you how to use. We'll learn a little bit more in that part, but for now I think this is all you need to know to really get you started. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, just give me a like or subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.